had a crisis of conscience because here I'm uh, enriching players financially, but it goes back to the whole concept of what is the fiduciary responsibility of an agent?
Yeah.
Simply to stack more dollars after more dollars into bank books, or is it to also think about long-term health and the implications following a career from being hit multiple times? Bennett Amalu, who was the subject of the film The Concussion, came and he suggested that three or more is the cutoff point, and after that, you have an exponentially higher risk of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, premature senility, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and uh, premature dementia. So I called it a ticking time bomb and an undiagnosed health epidemic. Here's what's different, Mike, about this issue. We know that an athlete will have problems over to pick up their kid from problems with their knees and their hips and their back just by playing the sport of football. That's bad enough. Not being able to identify your son or daughter, it's a totally different level of impact. And the difficulty in this situation is that the brain is the seat of consciousness, character, memory, and what it means to be an active human being.
Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. Mike is passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
Leigh Steinberg, thank you so much for being our guest again on the Mike Litton Show, Mike Litton Experience, pardon me. I'm so excited for our time together. I can't even talk right? So I am really, really excited about talking about the Leigh Steinberg Foundation. There are a number of things that you're doing. We've talked about the book, The Comeback. We've had you on talking about that. We have your life story, as people know. We've also talked about the last time we were on, or pardon me, we're going to talk about Leigh Steinberg Foundation today. Next time you're on, we're going to talk about Agent Academy. And previously, last week, we talked about MD Envoy. So the things that you're working on are just amazing. And it's really, I believe, a testament to your heart. Like, you have always come at this in terms of how you can help other people. And I know that it was a big part of your upbringing and that kind of thing. You know, your dad had a major influence in your life. So does your granddad too. But thanks again for being here, bud.
My pleasure.
So the Leigh Steinberg Foundation is, I think, something incredibly important that we need to talk about. And I'll tell you why. You've been working on this for decades now. Back when nobody was talking about concussions, nobody was talking about CTE, nobody was talking about these things, okay? And the NFL was in denial. You were bringing it up. You were consulting with doctors. You were sitting with people and talking to them and asking questions that, quite honestly, very few people could answer. Can you talk about that for a second?
So in the 1980s, there were weekends where I was representing half the starting quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And they kept getting hit in the head and concussed in games. And Mike, I had a crisis of conscience because here I'm enriching players financially, but it goes back to the whole concept of what is the fiduciary responsibility of an agent? Simply to stack more dollars after more dollars into bank books, or is it to also think about long-term health and the implications following a career from being hit multiple times? So when our players would suffer concussions, we would go to neurologists and doctors and ask, how many is too many? What's the cutoff point after which this is a high risk? And frankly, in the 80s, they had no answers because brain was the last frontier of medical research. And while we knew everything about every bodily joint, the knee and the hip and the shoulder and the elbow, very little about what the effect of concussions were. So I thought, what if we hold a conference and bring neurologists from across the country who are specialists in? What if we also talked about playing surface and artificial turf? What if we bring in people that are involved with helmetry? What if we contemplate rules changes? So in 1994 in Newport Beach, we held the first concussion or player safety conference and got neurologists together, and players were there listening directly to the essence of the information. And so Troy Aikman, Steve Young, Warren Moon, Drew Bledsoe, Rob Johnson, a number of players came. And since we had very little answer to the questions of how many is too many, when do you contemplate retirement, we continued having those conferences. Well, by 2006, Bennett Amalu, who was the subject of the film The Concussion, came and he suggested that 3 or more is the cutoff point, and after that you have an exponentially higher risk of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, premature senility, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and premature dementia. So I called it a ticking time bomb and an undiagnosed health epidemic. This wasn't a popular position because at that point, the NFL, in essence, wanted to sweep this all under the table. And even my own players faced the concept of denial. Mm-hmm. Denial is being acculturated and part of a group that starts with Pop Warner and Little League. And it's accepting values that say real men don't complain, real men don't acknowledge injury, and it causes a value shift that the rest of society wouldn't agree with. For the rest of society, long-term health would be the key. Yeah. Well below that, Mike, is the priority having a athletic career, and below that, being able to play in any given season, and lesser than that, the ability to play in a game. And the least important long-term health value would be playing that play. Yeah. The athlete turns it on its head. The closest analogy is men in the military who share the same thing. And so players fear being left out, being dubbed a training table player, a perpetually injured player. And so they don't want to admit it. So that was what we learned in 2006. We've continued on to have somewhere in the range of 30 of these conferences. And the knowledge keeps getting better and more refined. One of the dangers is that when an offensive lineman hits a defensive lineman at the inception of every play, it produces a low-level subconcussive event, just a little bit of brain change. So theoretically, you could have an offensive lineman who played high school, college, and a long pro career, who had 10,000 subconcussive events, none of which were diagnosed, none of which the athlete was even aware of. He just felt stunned like they do after every play. And but the aggregate of those hits clearly add up to getting knocked out 3 or 4 times. So the very game uh, uh, exacerbates these conditions.
Yeah.
Have bigger, stronger, faster athletes hitting at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
And it again, it produces a subconcussive event. So I thought, if 50% of the mothers understand the causal connection between playing tackle football and dementia and long-term problems, until they're teenage boys, you can play any sport, but not tackle football. It won't destroy pro football, but gradually will change the sociology of who plays.
Mhm.
So people from tough economic circumstances will continue playing, but gradually you have a shift away. That's an existential threat to football.
Yeah.
I believe that collegiate, high school, pro sports teach invaluable lessons.
Yeah. I agree.
Playing the game, that it teaches self-discipline. It teaches postponing future gratification for the current situation. It promotes teamwork,
Mhm.
band of brothers. It takes complex amounts of information, necessitates processing it in real time,
Yeah.
and it teaches so many things that can augur well for success later in life in anything. Now, this is not just a pro football problem.
Yeah.
College, it's high school. And out of these seminars, we came up with some recommendations. First of all, to not play tackle football until someone at least gets to high school. You see, the adolescent brain is particularly apt to being concussed, and the damage for a 30-year-old might take a week to recover. It might be 3 weeks for someone younger, and they also have to go to school.
Yeah.
So you've got intellectual demands on them. So one of the suggestions was postponing playing tackle. One of the sports impacted that people don't think a lot about is soccer.
Mhm.
When someone heads the ball, they're directly producing some level of damage.
Concussive activity. Yeah.
And girls, especially young girls, have thin necks and they have less ability to be able to accept being hit that way without damages. So every year now at the Super Bowl, we hold a player safety concussion seminar. This year in San Francisco, we spent 2 hours with some 20 different doctors talking about it. So my thought was, what if we set up a foundation that might be able to raise money for research, that might put together a training program for younger medical personnel, that would go ahead and spread the message in the news so that it was clear to everybody approaching soccer, hockey, field hockey, any rugby, any sport with collision in it, and tried to at least make sure that people were aware. Now we have amazing biomed processes that are coming out of the research field. And it used to be the thought that once a brain was concussed, it was just a slippery slope down to all the maladies that we talked about. But today we have some breakthroughs. There's a process called RTMS, which is magnets against the brain, which can rewire a brain.
Wow. I
Except
didn't know about that. That's crazy.
plasticity,
Yeah.
being able to take a damaged brain and redo the circuitry and reestablish synapses and connectivity. Another one's called neurofeedback. So there are also devices and medicine that can make someone less apt to have a concussion if administered prior. And then there are a variety of different techniques that either stop swelling after the brain has been hit, so they can stop swelling. There's another that cools off the brain because the problem is inflammation, and inflammation simply makes it worse. So the point is to keep discovering these new breakthroughs and see if there's a better way. One of the new proposals, it comes from the Ivy League, and in the Ivy League for football, they don't hit during training camp. They don't have contact. They don't have contact during practices. All the hitting is limited to on the field, and they just simply model the plays. Every time we change a rule for more protection, and one of the most basics was not using the head for blocking and tackling. Every time we do that, purists cry out that we're altering the game, that we're sissifying the game, that we're somehow less than getting the full experience. And yet, we've made some of these changes, and pro football and college football just came out of their most successful season yet. So fans don't even notice the changes that have been made in a protective sense. The other focus of the of the Concussion Foundation is, can we provide treatment to underserved groups? So the firefighters who fought in the Palisades conflagration would be one subject. Homeless people or the unhoused would be another. People from the inner city that don't have access to the resources. So could we actually provide treatment for all of them? So with this foundation, we put together a board of advisors from the medical field, and we have about 20 physicians that are serving on the board. We also have a group of retired players. Current players are less anxious to be identified with the issue, but we have people like Warren Moon and Earl Campbell and Ray Lewis and a variety of players who are sitting on an advisory board. So we're still in the early stages of the launch, and hopefully we can make a dent in somehow pushing back on the damage that ensues from collision sports.
Yeah, I don't even know where to start in terms of how many different ways I admire you, but I do want to talk about this for a second, if it's okay. When you got started, and you've mentioned this before on the podcast, but when you got started, you'd pick up the phone and call a GM from an NFL football team about a player, and they'd hang up on you.
Yes.
Right? They had no business or no interest whatsoever in talking with an agent, having to deal with an agent, none of that. And you were able to trailblaze that, right? So then you keep looking out for your athletes, you keep looking out for your clients, you keep putting them first, and you find a problem. In this case, it's a problem with concussions, right? And you start something in 1994 and nobody has any answers. Everybody's just literally kind of throwing up their hands going, we don't know, we don't know. But because you started it and because you had let's be honest, the guts to do it, okay, you put it forefront, you put it out there, and it started becoming, it wasn't popular, but it started becoming a subject. It started becoming something that people started paying attention to. And then all of a sudden, the news started reporting on it, things started happening. You started in 94, 2006, 12 years later is when you actually had sort of that answer to the question of the three, right? Now you have the NFL involved, you have the NFL Players Association involved, you have all of these entities involved, and they're talking to each other about helmets. They're talking to each other and making rule changes about not leading with your head. You have targeting now that's called, and the players, if they're found to have targeted, are now ejected from the game. There is a major amount of progress that you've made over the last 3 decades, right? I mean, we're talking 32 years ago when you started this, just in terms of the conferences. But you started that conversation way before 94, right?
As I said, it was the late 80s. I had an experience. Troy Aikman was a rookie playing quarterback for the Cowboys. And in a game in Arizona, he got knocked out. And I sat in the stands waiting for him to get up. Blood was coming out of one of his ears. It terrified me to think how close the bond is between sentient consciousness and not being able to function. And here's what's different, Mike, about this issue. We know that an athlete will have problems over to pick up their kid from problems with their knees and their hips and their back just by playing the sport of football. That's bad enough. Not being able to identify your son or daughter, it's a totally different level of impact. And the difficulty in this situation is that the brain is the seat of consciousness, character, memory, and what it means to be an active human being. And so the impact of that organ is something on an entirely different dimension from, having some problems walking or having some problems leaning over, or the breakdown that occurs in collision sports in every joint. I mean, it hits the ankle and the knee and the hip and the back and the shoulders and all the rest of it. So we know that's going to happen. But the point is that what does an athlete do for the rest of their life if their brain's impaired?
Yeah.
And again, we have new treatments, new supplements, and all the rest of it. But to me, the NFL did a very poor job. They've caught up recently, but back in the day, they were telling players that there were no long-term consequences, that there was no connection causally between getting two in close temporal proximity. There was, and they told the players, no problem. And there was a man named Elliot Pellman who was the head of Paul Tagliabue's brain resources. And I mean, he had he had gone to med school at the University of Guadalajara, and he was someone who specialized in the lungs. So he wasn't even from that field. So of all the people they could have picked, out of the thousands of neurologists who'd be totally excited about being involved with the NFL, they picked someone from a different specialty, a different background. And at one point, he said, I think to Sports Illustrated that that I was a fearmonger, and I was unnecessarily raising concern and attention in an area that didn't require it. And there actually were pieces of paper that would have come out in discovery in the big lawsuit the players filed against the NFL. And they ended up settling for pittance of what the real damage was. The problem was there were older players who were in need of being treated right now.
Right away, yeah.
They accepted a deal that didn't require the NFL to admit any wrongdoing, was able to completely bifurcate the present from the past and say, we knew nothing and all the rest of it. Today, the situation with the NFL is much better.
Yeah.
They have a concussion protocol. They have actual employees sitting in the press box or on the sidelines looking for impaired players. And when they find them, they pull them out of the game.
Yeah, they stop the clock, they stop the game, right?
Put them into a tent, and so that's a higher level. But again, we've looked at everything from tackling dummies that are robots that be hit. Here's the way I look at it. If we have the technological engineering know-how to send a space probe to Mars, we can somehow figure out a helmet actually is more protective. Now, let's be transparent here. No helmet will prevent all concussions. And but some of the advances, the Guardian cap, for example, is a good advance. Most concussions occur from the side of the head. So if someone can see the threat coming and brace for it, they have a better chance not to be concussed. But we look at everything, including turf, and artificial turf is especially hard, and getting knocked against it can produce a concussion.
So can you talk about that for a second? Because I don't think a lot of people are up to speed with how the playing surfaces were back in the day. Okay, so there were running backs and some other players that you know more than I do, but I know of running backs in particular that I heard about that would not go to particular teams because their astroturf at their home and their practice fields were just like it was like concrete and artificial turf. Like there was no padding, there was no nothing, right? And
Nope.
they would get their knees hurt, they'd get their backs hurt, but you're talking about when they would fall and they would hit their like you've seen people get tackled or players get tackled or get their legs taken out from under them and their head bounces off of the surface, the playing surface.
Right.
It's got to be easier on them for if it's natural turf like grass, that kind of thing. And even the new artificial turf, right? Can you talk about how thin and how awful that turf was in the 70s? Like at the Astrodome, for instance?
There's obviously inclement weather in many parts of the country, especially football season. And having natural grass is a maintenance challenge because it gets wet, it turf, the grass comes out, all sorts of things can happen. In 1995, I represented the first pick in the first round of the NFL draft. His name was Keyshawn Carter, and he was a running back for Penn State, and he went to the Cincinnati Bengals. In the preseason of his rookie season, he planted and blew out his knee.
I remember that.
And what he said afterwards was, my foot stuck in the rug. So that, and he never had the career he would have had. So artificial turf can be hard, doesn't give, and there's always a big fight going on between players and the Players Association that wants that out of every stadium, and the cost savings that having less maintenance with the what we used to call AstroTurf is this battle goes on, but there's no reason not to have natural grass, a more forgiving playing surface.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the difficulties.
So is that something that your foundation and your concussion experts have gotten into in terms of the sort of the degree of injury from this concrete hard AstroTurf type surface versus a natural surface, right? So like the new turf, artificial turf, whatever, is longer. It seems like they're having a tougher time with traction, and I could be wrong, but there's all these rubber pellets, these black rubber pellets that are in the turf itself, and afterwards the players come off and they're covered in them.
You can, if you watch real closely, you can see in a game, someone hit the ground and the pellets come up.
Right.
And so that's just one of a number of different ways. Again, the NFL is doing a better job protecting the player. Remember this, again, this is all the backdrop of hardcore football purists who wince at any changes that occur. But think about this. When you protect a quarterback, for example, it doesn't diminish the game. The action moves downfield anyway. The player releases the ball, and all the action is the wide receiver and the defensive back. So it's not something, these protective rules don't diminish the joy and excitement of football really in any way.
They actually enhance it, right? And if you can enhance, and go ahead.
What I was going to say is we now have a salary cap system, which means that if a team is paying the franchise quarterback $50 million a year, his backup might be playing for the minimum.
Right. And they are. A lot of them are.
So when you lose a critical player, you lose a left tackle. And the cap system works that they don't have enough cap room to go find the next left tackle. But that even assumes that there was someone sitting at home outside of football that would be good. The drop off in talent level is precipitous. It's dramatic. And so what changes fans' enjoyment of the game is the fact that if Michael Penix is playing for the Atlanta Falcons, and now he's down, in that case, they had Kirk Cousins. But in most cases, you don't have anyone who's similar in talent level. so that it can destroy a whole race. That's why I've been roaming the world looking for new breakthroughs. There are all sorts of healing modalities, machines, treatments that can do a couple things. One, they can take the fact that most football games at the pro level, probably 30% of them are blowouts.
Mhm.
For the remaining 70%, the game may come down to the last quarter, the last drive, and we saw last season, the last play.
Right.
Question is, can you stimulate productivity, focus, stamina, and energy in those critical windows to give a player an advantage? So I looked at hyperbaric oxygen, which is anti-inflammatory. The second thing we're trying to solve is how fast a player can recover from injury. So hyperbaric oxygen accelerates healing. There's a process called red light, accelerates healing. There's a cannula that you breathe through called Nanovi that can do the same thing. There's another process which is called Bimini, and that involves hoses going into a bathtub, oxygenating the water, and then the water goes into the system. So there's a whole potpourri of healing machines, and then for those of us over the age of 40, I mean, I'm making a presumption, Mike, you look very young.
Oh, thanks, man. You're the only person in 20 years that said that, but thanks.
But the point is, for the whole rest of the population, not getting dementia, not getting Alzheimer's or Parkinson's is really critical, because, when I turned 70, I said, I want to have another long run here. I want to be able to be productive and retain, rational powers for a while and live longer. And there's a study that shows that the telomeres, which are the internal building blocks that focus on how long and effectively you're going to live, that someone who does 40 sessions of hyperbaric oxygen can extend those telomeres by 20% and 60 sessions by 25%. So I'm not a doctor, I don't pretend, but it just makes sense to me that could result in 8 to 10 more years of healthy living. And young kids born today can probably have a lifespan of well over 100 years. So I've been aggregating this with the purpose of going into pro and collegiate sports. But my point is, anybody who's not an athlete, who's interested in a better quality of life, can use some of these modalities. There are supplements which are really effective in stimulating, and we're talking about there's stem cells, there's exosomes, there's peptides, there are a variety of things that can be integrated into someone's system.
Yeah. So we had a peptide expert on that actually puts Navy SEALs back together after they come back from deployment and come back from trainings and that kind of thing. And he uses peptides to do that. So it's, peptides are something that people are, it's becoming more popular, I guess, and people are looking into it. You mind if we talk about two things really quickly? First of all, So you mentioned hyperbaric chamber, and for people that aren't sure about what that is, can you talk about what a hyperbaric chamber is? I mean, I know you mentioned oxygen, but how does it get oxygen into your system?
Well, I go 3 times a week to have hyperbaric. You lie in a chamber, and for people who have claustrophobia, it's closed, but there's plenty of light coming in and plenty of ways that you don't feel like you're a mummy or trapped. And and you lie there for about an hour, and you breathe through a face mask, and the oxygen is like going into a diving bell, like um, uh, it. So your ears pop a little bit when you start, and they're so sophisticated now. In the place I use O2, they have a uh, screen which has Netflix on. So, and you can watch Landman or The Pit or any show that you want, and the time goes quickly.
Like
And
it's a whole different idea of, of Netflix and chill, right? So hyperbaric is they're changing the pressure, right? So they're pressurizing the oxygen flow coming into your body, correct?
it's like the way you feel on a plane
Yeah,
and it descends quickly.
yeah.
Uh, and so, yes, it's that. And again, another way in Bimini, you just sit in the bathtub for a half hour and I read, but you can do whatever you want. You could bring a little television in there. Those sessions are 30 or 35 minutes. The Nanovi won't, again, you're breathing through a cannula,
Mhm.
and it delivers directly there. Red light, you can stand or sit by the red light, and they also have something where you lie on your back.
There's a
And
bed, like a tanning bed almost, but it's red light.
so these are all becoming really popular.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to see them integrated into sports. There's some progressive franchises in pro sports that already have machines like this. Um, there's another thing called ultraviolet sauna, which heats you up to a very uh, intense level,
Mhm.
and the sweat takes away toxins and the rest of it. And there are a whole bunch of chairs that do a variety of different things. So people listening should explore some of this for themselves. And again, it's got a direct application to sports.
Yeah. So one thing I'd like to talk about, if it's okay. So you mentioned that the brain, when you first got started with all this, was just the last frontier, right? But I'm telling you, I want to communicate to you that a lot of this wouldn't have happened without your leadership. If you hadn't been willing to take on, just like when you started representing athletes, okay? If you weren't willing to take on the slings and arrows, so to speak, right? And go out there and have people call you all the things that they called you and have the critics do their thing and all that. You'll have critics no matter what you try to do in life that's purposeful, right? But
Unless
go ahead.
uh, um, there's a very good way to inoculate yourself from criticism. Don't do anything.
Yeah, just do nothing, right? It's the safe route for sure. So, so you're doing something right if you're being criticized, right? I mean, that's. So, can we go back for just a second and talk about the brain because you've learned more about the brain than just about anybody on the planet because you've made this a focus for 3+ decades.
So
I'd like, go ahead.
one When I was in early recovery from alcohol, I knew that I should check in with an expert. There's a fellow named Dr. Daniel Amen who has the Amen Clinic. And what they do is they have a brain spec. They have a larger than life picture of your brain. And you can see in it if you have ischemia, which is lack of blood flow, and it creates white spots. And honestly, when I started, I had some of those areas. The alcohol had damaged my brain. And now, 16 years later, my brain's back to being hopefully high functioning. And but the white spots all went away.
That's awesome.
You can actually check on how you're doing. There are a variety of different tests, and like I said, the RTMS is one process, neurofeedback's another process, but you can actually check on how you're doing, and there are tests and different things you can take. So rather than being in denial, you can, there's actually things you can do. There's a whole slew of supplements that are helpful for the brain. You're trying to break what's called the brain blood barrier in the brain and get substances to go directly to it itself. And again, the treatments are so much better and novel. And just in the next year, there will be new breakthroughs. And they didn't have the instrumentation to really break down what was happening, the connection between one part of the brain and something else. And one of the things that happens in alcoholism is people will ask all the time, well, why don't you just stop? I mean, in the face of consequences, why would you continue on doing this? It's because there's a section of the brain that processes autonomic function. So you don't have to think about whether or not you're hungry, your body tells you. You don't have to think about whether or not you need to breathe. You just do. You don't need to think about whether or not
Your heartbeats, right?
whether you want to have sex. I mean, you just have the cues. And what happens is in substance abuse, the rational part, the decision-making function, the prefrontal lobe gets surpassed by the cravings.
Yeah, it's overtaken.
So your body tells you you have to drink or use cocaine or do whatever in the same way that you have to breathe. So that I would come back to my condo at night after work in my worst days of struggling, and I would say, tonight I'm not going to drink, and tonight's going to be different. And then magically, somehow, my car drove itself to the liquor store, and I was back in my condo with a big bottle of vodka. How did that happen? So when you ask someone who's an alcoholic, why didn't you just quit? It's no longer a matter of volition. It's no longer a rational choice you can make. It's just your brain is completely at the beck and call of the need for the substance.
It's rewired. Like it rewires itself, right? And that autonomic portion takes, I hope I'm saying it right, the autonomic portion takes over. Like it literally takes over. And it tells you that in order to survive this night, you have to have vodka.
So if you think about it, people would say, well, where's your willpower?
Yeah.
I think it took a little bit of willpower to set up the representation firm and sign the athletes and do the charitable and community programs. It's not a matter of willpower. It's not a uh, choice anymore. And the only way to stop that is to completely abstain from the substance. And the beauty of the process is after a few months, the cravings fade.
Yeah.
And so people think that somehow an alcoholic or a drug addict has the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other, and it's a constant struggle. It's not. As long as you do the effective recovery principles, and as long as you stay with your program, um, I don't think about alcohol at all anymore.
Right. So one thing I'd like to cover really quickly before we finish is I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, and I want our listeners to understand. When a brain gets concussed multiple times and this CTE enters in, right? Or forms, it's the exterior of the brain hardening out of defense, right? Like the brain's trying to protect itself. It keeps getting slapped, it keeps getting injured, and so it toughens its exterior. Isn't that what CTE is?
It's a buildup of protein called tau, which builds up in the brain, and it alters the brain function,
Yeah.
and and each progressive concussion makes it worse. If it takes that to do the first concussion, it takes that to do the second concussion. The first one I was trying to do a loud noise, and the second just a
Right. Harder, less hard, right?
so the point is that the brain becomes more apt to be concussed, and then if you have two in close proximity to each other, in other words, game one concussion, game two, it takes much less to do the next one, and two is the in close time frame becomes the perfect neurological storm.
Yeah.
And there are a number of players who suffered back-to-back concussions, and it's 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 there. It's trauma that's much greater.
It keeps exponentially getting worse, right? Even with lighter hits,
Yeah.
the damage. So neuroplasticity, like you're talking about the magnets and that kind of thing, that use of that therapy or modality, that is all about getting through that hardening of the brain and making it more supple, right?
Yes, it's um, the the impact of it is that the brain, in essence, gets negatively rewired.
Right.
And the treatments done well uh, uh, try to return it back. It's the concept of neuroplasticity,
Right.
the rewiring of a concussed brain, and you people who suffer from too many hits or too hard hits set up an opposite syndrome. And you might remember in the concussion movie, there was a center from the Steelers, Mike Webster,
Yeah, I remember that.
to the point where he had so little stimulation going on that he took a cattle prod and prodded himself to try to
Mhm.
create some energy in his system. People used to ask me, what would it take back in the day to get some action on concussion? And I said, well, the sad truth is that it probably takes somebody dying. And Dave Duerson killed himself, ex-Chicago Bears safety, and then Junior Seau had tragedy. And if you recall, they were coherent enough that they each shot themselves in the
heart. Yeah.
their brain could be researched. Right now, we don't have a instant way of assessing how close we are to CTE. So the only way they've been able to authoritatively identify it is taking the brain post mortem and seeing the tau, and you can see the plaque on the brain. It's a physical change which occurs.
Yeah. Yeah, the Junior Seau thing I told you hit close to home because his parents used to shop in the grocery store where I worked, and watching them go into that house after he had done that, it was one of the worst things ever. And one of the things they talked about was, especially his kids, was how forgetful he became. And he didn't make it to his daughter Sydney's volleyball game. And his mother said, she said, didn't you tell Dad? And she said, yeah, I told Dad yesterday. And she said, you can't tell him the day before, he forgets, right? Did you remind him how to get there? You know, that kind of thing, right? All the things that they went into to try to help him navigate life and when you combine that, all those limitations and all that frustration with the high standard that he had and all these pro players have, it just becomes a ticking time bomb. And it's awful, absolutely awful. And the work that you've done has just been unbelievable in this area.
The way I look at it is it's not important who gets credit for something like this. What's important is that you solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And it says a lot about you and a lot about your character. So it's the Leigh Steinberg Foundation. It's leightsteinbergfoundation.org if people want more information. Is there any other way that you want them to reach out if they want to be involved or want to support what you're doing?
Well, we can always use help,
Yeah.
and you just suggested the most effective way to set up the concept. I mean, have spoken in a number of health conferences, and I've probably been to 20 different concussion-oriented events, but people just need to have the information so they can make an intelligent decision whether or not to participate in football or hockey, when to start, when it's safe, and so they can make an informed decision. Like I said, I think that if 50% of the moms in this country, or moms and dads, understood the dangers and tell their teenage boys, as I said a minute ago, you can play any sport but not tackle football, it will just change the socioeconomics of it. So it becomes like a gladiator sport. Eventually, why I call it the existential threat is that if you change the composition of who plays, that's what happened with a sport like boxing. Boxing became a way to succeed financially for people who didn't have any other, or thought they didn't have any other career choices. And so right now, pro football dominates American culture. And not only is the most popular sport, Mike, it's the most popular form of televised entertainment. And so it's not going away. but anyone connected with it needs to be part of this concept of making football safer. I'm not to destroy football or collision sports. Again, as I said up front, I think they teach invaluable life lessons, but the brain is so central to our lives that we need to be cognizant of it.
Well, I, for one, can't thank you enough for your leadership in this. I can't thank you enough for blazing a trail. Can't thank you enough for what this awareness has done, not only to the NFL, but to other sports and what parents have in terms of an educated, more educated opportunity to look at this. Thank you again for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Leigh. Appreciate you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at the Mike Litton Experience.